On my Instagram, a story came up where one of the people I'm connected to was painting in her house. She was sitting in a sort of a third world squat type position doing her painting, and the caption said something along the lines of, "My husband says I even do yoga while I'm painting." And it's kind of an interesting picture. It's a nice picture, but it leads more towards the functionality of yoga, the functionality of exercise in general, and having that carryover into activities that you would do day to day. Exercise should make you better at activity. I always say activity first, exercise as your supplement. And this picture tends to show that pretty nicely. I wanted to talk a little bit about that today, offering some clarification on that type of topic and that type of idea about ownership of movement and how these things, they're not necessarily moves that are owned by a particular method of exercise, but they're movements in general that we all borrow from. I also wanted to talk a little bit about yoga, a conversation I had with an occupational therapist friend of mine a long time ago, probably 3 or 4 years at this point, that stuck in my brain for a long time. I've thought about it quite a bit, and I wanted to talk about the entry point of yoga. I wanted to give a shout out to this occupational therapist as well, but I wanted to talk about the entry point of yoga, and do we really have to consume the entire meal to get the benefit of yoga? Is it yoga if we only do one piece of it, or at least that's the entry point? We're going to talk about that on the podcast today. It's going to be a big yoga heavy podcast, so I hope to see you on the other side of the intro. Don't go anywhere. Defending mediocrity in our profession. Welcome back, and thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today, the Dr. Krol PT and Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lee Krol, the same as always. If you're doing this, if you're already past the intro, I need you to go down and hit that like, need you to hit that subscribe. There's a little bell next to subscribe. You can hit that. That's going to let you know when all the podcasts are dropping. I usually set them as premiere, so there's about a 15-minute little warning window that lets you know that some new content's coming. Go ahead and do that for me. Like it and share it on social media. That always helps out the channel as well. So I really appreciate you guys coming by today. What I wanted to talk about was ownership of movement, functionality, and an entry point for yoga. It's going to be a very yoga heavy podcast today, but we're going to be talking about a couple other things in exercise as well. So as I was saying before the intro, someone I'm connected to on Instagram was doing a third world squat position while she was painting her house. It's excellent. And again, this is not a knock on anything about this. It's actually a very good thing. So we're looking at someone doing a third world squat, painting her house, and it says, "My husband says I even do yoga while I'm painting or doing something around the house." And it's really a good thing because this person is very involved in yoga, doing it several days a week, really enjoying where she's doing her yoga, and this is all a good thing. This is good exercise for her, and it's giving a functional component. So we always talk about function. Function's a buzzword that gets thrown around, functional especially, gets thrown around all the time. But what does it really mean when we say functional? To me, functional means that it has a carryover into some other aspect of your life that is useful. So if you're doing a bunch of leg extensions at the gym, leg extensions always get picked on. If you're doing a bunch of leg extensions at the gym, that doesn't really show to have a big functional carryover into squatting, lunging, deadlifting, single leg balance, anything that may have a day-to-day usefulness in real life. It doesn't really have a big functional carryover. It's not that it's a useless piece of equipment or a useless exercise. It just doesn't have a lot of functional carryover. But things like Olympic lifting have shown to have high functional carryover. Yoga, Pilates have shown to have high functional carryover. Creeping, crawling, exercises, floor work, when done correctly, is shown to have a very high functional carryover into day-to-day activities. They help you move around better. They help you perform any just basic day-to-day activities, whether it's climbing stairs, picking stuff up from the floor, painting, carrying, doesn't matter what it is. It has you're better at that activity because of the exercise you do. And that always goes back to a saying that I like to use all the time: activity first and exercise as your supplement. So what activities are you doing? Are you gardening? Do you do a lot of work around the house? Do you have a physical occupation? Are you a nurse, a physical therapist, something like that? Are you in a labor field? Are you in a factory setting? So those are the type of activities that you do. What exercises do you need to do to make those activities better? And that's a really important concept. So that's the long definition of what functional is. It has a carryover into something useful day to day. Yoga has that. Yoga does a really good job, when done well, of carrying over into your day-to-day life. You tend to move better. You can get into positions better. They're not so threatening where you're holding your breath or you're straining or you're fighting with the position. But it also tends to lead to an ownership issue, where we look at certain positions and certain movements and certain angles of the body and say, that's a yoga move, or that's a Pilates move, or that's a CrossFit move. And we tend to run into this problem of what comes first. And I think back a long time ago when Capcom came out with a game called Street Fighter 2. Street Fighter 2 was an arcade game that came out, and one of the hallmark moves in that game was the Shoryuken, which is a rising uppercut. And believe me, this has a point. I'm not just talking about video games here. When that game got big, that became pretty much the mother of all fighting games that came after it. All fighting games that came after it modeled themselves in some way after Street Fighter 2's mechanics. And some, really low-level knockoff games came out that people, played a little bit in the arcade. Some larger ones came out afterwards, but Capcom got into a lawsuit with one of the smaller game companies that was using a very similar looking move to the Shoryuken. And the judge, I believe correctly so, ruled that you don't own that movement. That's a human movement. It's not yours. They can't, they can use it as long as they're not completely copying everything about it, meaning the naming and what they're saying and how the characters look. But you don't own that movement no more than you own a roundhouse kick or an axe kick or a jab or a cross. You don't own that movement either. It's just a human movement. You're putting a name on it. And I think that's a really important thing, because yoga does the same thing. Yoga will get into all sorts of different positions: child's pose, downward dog, mountain pose, tree pose, all these different positions, warrior poses, triangle pose, but they don't own that movement. I can take osteokinematically, which is basically how the bones are moving compared to each other, I can take and break down that movement into a whole bunch of different angles and joint positions. So if you're in a downward dog, I can say, well, they're in a loaded dorsiflexion, a knee extension, a hip flexion. I can go into all that. They're into shoulder flexion at about 170 to 180 degrees. It doesn't sound as fun. It's not as quick and easy to say as get into a downward dog, but really the downward dog is just a series of joint positions. It's not owned by yoga. Nothing we do in exercise nowadays is novel. We don't have any new movements that we come up with. All these movements have been figured out. It's not like someone's out there saying, hey, you know what? I found a new way the wrist moves that nobody has ever thought about. Nobody has ever seen before. I mean, there's only a couple different ways the wrist moves. It moves in flexion, extension, radial deviation, ulnar deviation, circumduction, and that's pretty much it. There's no new movement that we're going to find of the wrist. There's no new movement we're going to find at the knee or the ankle or the hip. We know all these movements. They've been well mapped out. All exercise does is take these and put them in different packages, put them in different orientations, present them in their own unique way, in a flow, in a sequence that people will actually do. And this is a good thing. This is a good thing, but we want to get away from the idea, or at least the thought that this is a yoga move. And we'll talk about why in a little bit. But downward dog is not a yoga move. It's the name of a position used when practicing yoga, but yoga doesn't own it. And I hear that all the time. Oh, this is a martial arts move. This is a yoga move. This is a dance move. No, it's a human movement. And people are always surprised when I pull something out that looks like dance. They're like, well, you don't dance. I'm like, well, no, I don't dance at all. But I understand the human movement, which is why I'm able to work with athletes and people who do anything. It doesn't matter. If you come to my clinic and you're a CrossFitter, a runner, a dancer, a martial artist, it doesn't matter, because you're an athlete first. And before that, you're a moving human. And before that, you're a healthy human. So these things are a pyramid. Health is at the bottom, movement is next, athleticism is after that, and then skill stacks on top of it. So it doesn't matter what skill you do. It doesn't matter if it's soccer, American football, dance, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, taekwondo, yoga, CrossFit. It doesn't matter. You're a moving human being first, and I can make you better at that. All of those skill components, it doesn't matter what name you put on it, it doesn't matter at all. You have to be able to move first, and I can help you move, which is why I can help out anybody. It doesn't matter what type of skill activity they do. And again, it's not a matter of yoga owning these moves no more than CrossFit owns these moves, although we do tend to link these things a little bit. But these aren't bad things. It isn't bad that we think of downward dog in terms of yoga. As long as it gets people actually doing some sort of exercise, that's fine. There are just a couple issues about it. And that's where I wanted to go next with this. A couple of years ago, I had a conversation with an occupational therapist friend of mine, someone I went to school with. She ended up graduating the same year as I did, I believe, with her master's in occupational therapy. And we talked for a little while. We met up when I was at a seminar, and we chatted for a little bit, and I was talking about yoga. And the conversation got a little bit heated, which was fine. I'd never shy away from that. And I was talking about how I focus really on the physical side of yoga. I don't worry too much about the other stuff. I really focus on the physical side of yoga. And she got a little irritated by that and said, that's not yoga. And that really stuck in my brain for a long time. And I thought about that for years, really. I've been thinking about, well, is she right? Is she wrong? Does it even matter if it's about right or wrong? And it really doesn't. But I'm looking more for information, not affirmation. I'm not trying to prove my point versus anything else. I want to get information, mold my opinions with the truth wherever it goes. It doesn't matter to me. So I really thought about what she said about that's not yoga. And I've thought about a couple other people like Dr. Ginger Garner, who have taken some of her courses in medical therapeutic yoga. And really, Dr. Garner talks about 5 realms, the sort of pentagon of wellness conceptual model, where she talks about psycho-emotional, social wellness, intellectual wellness, physical wellness, spiritual wellness, and energetic wellness. And her yoga method encompasses all of those things as sort of a biopsychosocial model of health versus the biomedical model of health that you'd be used to if you went to, let's say, a hospital, where it's like, okay, we took an image, your appendix is a problem, we're going to take it out. That's a very biomedical approach. What is the exact problem physiologically, and how do we fix it, either surgically, pharmacologically, more conservative measures? What do we have to do to fix the problem? Whereas the biopsychosocial model looks at the psychological components, the energetic components, spiritual, etc. So again, one of those components is physical. And I look at yoga as one of those things where, what is its entry point to the general public? So people who have been doing yoga, they're doing it 6 days a week, they're already invested. And we all believe, myself included, that yoga, just like CrossFit and Pilates and martial arts and dance, has a lot of benefit to the general public. If you're being active or you're doing some sort of activity, especially a skill-based activity, where I consider yoga a skill-based activity, because you have to learn how to master the poses. It doesn't matter if it's mountain pose that you're trying to master, or some sort of side angle pose or a crow, or it doesn't matter what type of pose you're trying to master, there is still a mastery level about it. And yes, there is a mastery level to mountain pose as well in terms of your breathing and your calmness, and these are all the different realms. But if I were to ask you at home, thinking about this, listening to this podcast, picture a yoga studio. I guarantee most people have an idea of what a yoga studio looks like. It's got soft music, there may be candles, there may be a water fountain in there, not a drinking water fountain, but a decorative water fountain. The walls may be soft colors like a light green or a yellow or something like that, or a very dull yellow, something very soft. And what do yogis look like? And again, people are going to have these ideas of what yogis look like. Good, bad, or indifferent. It doesn't matter. This is not a shot or anything. It's just good, bad, or indifferent. We know what a yoga studio looks like. We have a preconceived notion of what yogis are. Just like if I were to say, what's a CrossFit box? Again, we would come up with the same type of things. It's probably got a very dark padded floor. It's more industrial looking, a lot of machines. And what do CrossFitters look like? And again, you would come up with the same basic ideas. They're wearing shorts, they have high compression socks on, they usually have a headband, chalk all over their hands, and we have a notion of what a CrossFitter looks like, just the same with a power lifter, a martial artist, a dancer, a runner, anything like that. We have preconceived notions of what they look like, good, bad, or indifferent. It doesn't matter. We just have these preconceived notions. And I work with a wide variety of clientele in terms of patients and particular clients. And one thing that I've seen all the time is that they have an idea of what yoga is, they have an idea of what they like, and they have an idea of what is going to resonate with them. If you've worked with any type of patient load or client load, you understand that you can't talk to every patient the same way. Certain patients have things that resonate with them. My patient population is very similar. Educated, astute, smart, not interested in a cheerleader routine, usually wants to know the why. Very information based, which is why they come to me. I'm sort of a dry individual. I have a lot of information. I'm much more scientific than other people. I'm not the cheerleader type. I'm like, yeah, you're doing such a great job, let's go. That's not me. That is completely phony. I can't do it. It doesn't work. And my clientele would fire me instantly if I ever tried that. So I have to do certain things and talk to them in a certain way that's going to resonate. It's very information based. If they walk into a yoga studio, if I say, I want you to go take yoga somewhere, and they walk into a yoga studio and the instructor, again, this is not a shot at the instructor is going to teach the way he or she feels is appropriate. But if the instructor is starting to say, okay, I want you to stand up and root yourself into the earth, feel the energy come to your heart center, pick up your chest tall and bring it up to the sun, and the people that I work with are going to reject that immediately. They are going to not be interested at all in that type of presentation of it. If you throw the spiritual and the energetic and the psychological, mental on top of them immediately, then they're going to reject it and they're never going to come back. Hence, they're going to lose all the benefits and all the values of yoga. So I think back to when I was an exercise science student and I had a professor, Dr. Harold Burton. Fantastic professor, love him to death. He was one of my favorites when I was going through the university at Buffalo. And he talked about exercise studies, and whenever we talked about research, the whole class kind of nodded off. It wasn't the most exciting topic, but he talked about a research topic that I thought was pretty fantastic. He was talking about how this one research study got thrown out, where all the researchers wanted to do, and if you're not familiar with research, the basic idea is you want to try to remove as many variables as possible to see if the variable or two that you're changing really makes a difference. If you have compounding changing variables, then you really can't say that what you changed made a difference. It's hard to test it. So these subjects in the exercise video or in the exercise study were told to do these set of exercises and change nothing else. Don't change the way you eat, don't change the way you drink, don't change anything else you're doing. Just do these set of exercises every single day and let's see what happens. Well, one by one, the subjects kept getting thrown out of the study because they started drinking more water. They started taking more walks and being more active. They started changing what they were eating, more fresh fruits and vegetables and lean meats and all that type of stuff. They started making a whole series of other healthy changes just because they started doing exercise first. And so while the study got thrown out because, well, you're not looking at the original work here, there was something very interesting that came off that study, was that if you change one level of health, one realm of your health, all the other levels tend to come with it. So I'll go back to that Pentagon of Wellness model that I talked about from Dr. Garner, which was there's 5 realms of health, and one of them is psycho, emotional, and social. One is energetic, intellectual, spiritual, and then physical. So again, I talk about my occupational therapist friend who said that is not yoga. And then I look back at the individual that I talked about, where if you present yoga to them in a certain way, they're going to reject it completely. So I look at all of that particular study, and I say, can't we have an entry point of yoga that is just physical? Can I have an entry point of yoga where we talk to individuals more in a biomedical type way? And you may think, well, that's not yoga. Don't call it yoga then, just call it something else. And again, yoga has a ton of benefits to it. But it also has a collective nature of it, which is both good and bad. All collectives, all tribes, all groups have good and bad about them. And yoga is no different. Yoga, if you look at a yoga collective, it's great in terms of they are supporting each other. It's usually a very positive type of energy. It's usually a very positive type of group. And we can do with all sorts of acro yoga, partner yoga, all sorts of different things in terms of camaraderie. But there is also a certain representation of yoga to the general public. People that don't know a lot about yoga that think, well, I don't want to go to the flats in Sedona and start dancing around a campfire, which is, again, some of the stuff that comes with the collective of yoga. And these are not just my thoughts. These are things that people tell me. I'm reporting to you what people tell me, why they won't do yoga, why they won't do martial arts, why they won't do CrossFit. I try to push people into all sorts of different activities and try to find the right thing for them. There's a lot of people I think would benefit greatly from yoga. But when I say yoga, sometimes they roll their eyes. They're like, I don't want to do that. I don't want this. And, I'm not interested in being told to root myself into the ground and, be one with Mother Earth. And again, these are what other people are telling me. So again, why can't we have just a physical type of yoga where we sort of have an entry point? So we have the biomedical people talking, your physicians, MDs, DOs, people that are very rooted in the science. They want to know why it works. If you're saying, okay, this treatment works or this method works, they want to know why. What's the physiology behind it? How do we measure it? We don't have a way to measure energy or chakra or anything like that. So there's even a debate whether it even exists because we can't measure it. So we have the biomedical people here who are not interested in, breathing from the earth and connecting with Mother Earth. They're not interested in that. They're interested in how does it work and why does it work? And then over here you have the yoga community, which if they're embracing all these realms of yoga, it's great. They make a lot of people feel better. They make a lot of people healthy, but there's a massive gap here between the two. And people like Dr. Garner are doing great work. Dr. Garner is a medical professional. She is a biomedically trained professional, and she's working on trying to bridge that gap. And it's great work. It's absolutely fantastic. I've met her. She's a wonderful individual doing all sorts of great work. But do we have to have even more of a bridge closer to the biomedical people where it's just the physical entry point? Where, okay, we start entering the physical point, we start bringing people in and not overburdening them with all of the other realms of yoga. We're not, we're presenting it in a way that is more biomedical. Easier for the physicians and the biomedical people to get on board with, but also easier for the general public to digest. And again, I talked about that study where people started changing their other health habits, just because they were starting to do better. If we start getting people involved in the physical side of yoga, don't you think all the other realms will start to come with it? Don't you think that they will eventually start to, because they're in long poses, long holding poses, a lot of time to think, don't you think that they would start to approach their intellectual health, their spiritual health, their energetic health, their psychological wellness? Don't you think those things would start to come with it as well? I certainly do. So the notion of that's not yoga if we're not embracing all realms of it, if we don't have the word of the day and we're not talking about the psychological side and the spiritual side, that's not yoga if we're just doing the physical moves and just concentrating on the physicality. To me, I don't agree with that. I think that that's a really good entry point, and it might be the exact correct entry point for some people. So why don't we embrace that? Why don't we embrace just doing the physical? Again, it's easier for the physicians and the biomedical people to get on board with, so they're more likely then to send people over there. If you're way over here and you're way over here doing all the, burying people with the spiritual stuff and the energetic stuff, again, there's a value to all this. But the physicians, the reality is the biomedical people are not going to jump all the way over there. They're more likely to jump into just the physical realm and then let the patient client sort of snowball and start to gain all the other benefits that yoga will come up with. The spiritual health, the psychological health, the energetic health, all that type of stuff is going to come with it, but you have to get them in the door. You have to have the entry point. I think you need an on-ramp for certain people. Some people will dive right in and will be all in on it and it'll be perfect for them. But again, we have certain things in yoga where it's not as, I'm not going to say it's not as inclusive, but it doesn't end up being as inclusive as maybe we would like. And what do I mean by that? If you look in a yoga studio, what's the ratio to men and women? 15 to 1? Or women to men, I should say. 15 to 1? 30 to 1? Sometimes it's that high. I went to a yoga in the park and there were about 7 men there and about 120 women. So it's reaching one group a lot more than the other. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's just, why aren't men getting involved in it? Is it because men are more analytical? This is a discussion that's well outside of my scope of practice and well outside of my expertise, so I'm not even going to go down that rabbit hole. But what's the reason that it's not reaching this group? When I went to a Dr. Garner course, there was only, I believe, 2 or 3 men in the entire room and about 30, 35, 40 females in the room, women in the room. So again, why isn't it reaching men as much as it is women? Is there a problem? There may not be a problem at all. It may be a problem in the mindset that we have to change, or the entry point to get more men in the door, because I believe yoga's got a ton of benefits for men. It's not just for women. It's just like CrossFit has a ton of benefits for women, not just for men. Same with martial arts, ton of benefits for women, not just for men. Same with dance. Dance is overwhelmingly women dominated. Has a ton of benefits for men as well. So maybe we need to have a different entry point. And again, all of this stuff, other stuff is fine. There's nothing wrong with diving headfirst all in on yoga and presenting it in an all-in fashion. But we want to try to catch as many people as possible to improve their health. Yoga is just one tool to do that. It doesn't own the movements. It's just one repackaging and one tool to do that. So why not make it more accessible to the general public? So thanks for listening to my little talk on yoga. Hit the comments section if there's something that you like or didn't like in there. Hit the comments. Let's have a little discussion about this. We can always revisit this topic at another time. My name is Dr. Lee Krol, physical therapist, talking about yoga here, and I will see you next time on the podcast. Don't forget to hit that like, share, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And I will see you next time on the Dr. Krol PT and Fitness Podcast.